Dr. Marcus Chun had always prided himself on being unflappable. 23 years working for the Xenobiological Research Institute had taught him that the universe held surprises around every corner. He had studied crystalline entities that sang mathematical theorems, observed gaseous beings that communicated through controlled electromagnetic pulses, and documented silicon-based life forms that reproduced by literally splitting reality at the quantum level. But nothing had prepared him for the message that appeared on his secure terminal that Tuesday morning. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the elegant form of HFY, one of the lead researchers from the HFY collective. Her species stood roughly 8 feet tall, with an ethereal, almost translucent quality to their pale blue skin. Her arms moved with fluid grace as she gestured, while her large, luminescent eyes conveyed an intelligence that had mastered faster-than-light travel while humans were still discovering agriculture. "Greetings, Dr. Chun." Her voice carried the melodic quality typical of her species, each word carefully modulated through their complex vocal apparatus. "I trust this communication finds you in optimal health and mental clarity." Marcus leaned back in his chair, already sensing this wouldn't be a routine research consultation. The HFY rarely initiated direct contact unless something significant was at stake. Their species had been humanity's first official contact with alien intelligence 7 years ago, leading to an unprecedented era of scientific collaboration and cultural exchange. "Dr. HFY," he replied, activating his own recording systems. "Always a pleasure. What brings you to reach out directly instead of going through the usual diplomatic channels?" The alien scientist's expression shifted subtly, her bioluminescent patches along her neck pulsing in what Marcus had learned indicated uncertainty or nervousness. "I have a proposition that requires discretion and your particular expertise in human psychology and behavior. My research has reached a critical juncture, and I believe human participation is not merely beneficial, but absolutely essential." Marcus raised an eyebrow. The HFY were known for their methodical approach to everything. For one of their scientists to express such urgency was unusual. "What kind of research are we talking about?" "Emotional and physical intimacy patterns across species barriers," HFY said without preamble. "More specifically, the potential for genuine romantic and physical connection between significantly different sapient species." The coffee mug Marcus had been reaching for stopped halfway to his lips. He set it down carefully, his mind racing through the implications. "That's quite a departure from your usual xenobiological surveys." "Indeed it is," she acknowledged, her secondary arms clasping together in what he recognized as a gesture of formal request. The project began as an academic inquiry into how different species might form lasting social bonds for potential colony cooperation. However, the preliminary data has revealed something unexpected. The potential for what humans call romantic love appears to transcend species barriers in ways our initial models never predicted. Marcus felt a flutter of unease. The scientific community had always maintained strict protocols about human-alien interaction, particularly anything that might venture into personal or intimate territory. The risks were too great, the unknowns too vast. "Dr. HFY, surely you understand the ethical considerations here. The biological differences alone make any kind of intimate study problematic, not to mention the psychological implications." "I am acutely aware of the challenges," she replied, her tone becoming more earnest. "But consider this. We stand at the threshold of an unprecedented era of interspecies cooperation. Colony ships are being planned with mixed crews. Long-term space stations will house multiple species for decades. Understanding how sapient beings form emotional bonds across species lines could be crucial for the psychological health and stability of these ventures." She was right, and Marcus knew it. The early reports from the joint research stations had already documented concerning levels of isolation and depression among crew members who couldn't form meaningful connections with their alien colleagues. The psychological toll of being surrounded by intelligent beings you could work with but never truly relate to was becoming a significant problem. Even accepting the academic merit, Marcus said slowly, the practical challenges are enormous. How do you study something as complex and personal as romantic connection without crossing ethical boundaries? How do you account for the vast physiological differences? The communication barriers? Ziwaraitha's large eyes seemed to brighten, and Marcus realized she had anticipated these questions. This is precisely why I need your expertise. You have spent more time working closely with our species than any other human researcher. You understand our communication patterns, our social structures, our psychological frameworks. More importantly, you have demonstrated remarkable adaptability in forming working relationships that transcend the typical professional boundaries. That last comment made Marcus shift uncomfortably in his chair. It was true that his collaborations with Kethvari researchers had been unusually successful, characterized by a level of trust and understanding that his colleagues often struggled to achieve. He had attributed it to his background in comparative psychology and his natural tendency toward empathy. But the way ZYR8 phrased it suggested she had been observing these interactions more closely than he had realized. What exactly are you proposing? He asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. A controlled study examining the development of emotional and physical intimacy between myself and a human volunteer over a period of 6 months. The volunteer would need to be someone with significant experience in interspecies communication, someone psychologically stable and adaptable, and someone willing to explore the boundaries of connection with genuine openness. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. You're talking about yourself as the alien subject. Correct. I have been studying human behavioral patterns for 3 years now, and I believe I have developed both the understanding and the personal inclination necessary for such an experiment. The question is whether I can find a human partner willing to participate. Marcus stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Institute's sprawling research campus. Below, humans and Kethvari moved through the courtyards together, engaged in animated discussions about projects and discoveries. It looked so normal now, so natural. But what ZYR8 was proposing would shatter every protocol and assumption about human-alien relations. Even if such a study were ethically approved, he said, still staring out the window, the personal cost to both participants could be enormous. You're talking about deliberately forming intimate bonds that may have no sustainable future. The psychological trauma of separation alone could be devastating. That is a risk I have considered extensively, ZYR8 replied. But consider also the potential benefits. If we can demonstrate that genuine intimate connections are possible across species barriers, it could revolutionize how we approach long-term interspecies cooperation. The colony missions, the deep space stations, the entire future of galactic civilization could be transformed. Marcus turned back to face the hologram. ZYR8's expression had become almost pleading, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with what he now recognized as hope mixed with vulnerability. For the first time since knowing her, she seemed less like the composed alien scientist and more like someone taking an enormous personal risk. Why me? He asked quietly. Surely there are other researchers who would be better suited for this kind of study. Because in our 3 years of collaboration, you're the only human who has ever made me wonder what it would feel like to bridge that final gap between our species, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You are the only one who has made me curious about human concepts of affection, of physical comfort, of emotional intimacy in ways that feel personal rather than purely academic. The admission hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he realized the full scope of what she was proposing. This wasn't just a scientific experiment. This was a personal journey that had been building between them for years, disguised as professional collaboration. ZYR8, he said carefully, are you telling me that you have feelings for me? I'm telling you that I have developed something analogous to what humans might call feelings, she replied. The precise nature of these emotions is part of what I wish to study. But, yes, when I am in your presence, I experience sensations and thought patterns that do not occur with other humans or even with members of my own species. I find myself anticipating our meetings, replay our conversations in what you might call daydreaming, and experience what I can only describe as longing when we are apart. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew about their professional relationships suddenly seemed naive. The long conversations that had stretched far beyond their scheduled meetings, the way she seemed to remember every personal detail he had ever shared, the subtle changes in her bioluminescent patterns when he entered a room, it all took on new meaning. "This is insane," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he realized they lacked conviction. "Perhaps," she agreed. "But consider this. We are already conducting the experiment, Marcus. We have been for months, maybe years. The only question is whether we approach it with scientific rigor and honest documentation, or continue to pretend that what exists between us is purely professional." She was right again, and the realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Marcus thought about the countless hours they had spent together, ostensibly working on translation protocols and behavioral studies. He remembered the way she had comforted him after his father's death 6 months ago, her alien form somehow providing exactly the kind of presence he had needed. He recalled the strange, fluttering sensation he experienced whenever she arrived for their meetings, the way he had begun choosing his clothes more carefully on days when they would be working together. "Even if I were willing to consider this," he said slowly, "the practical challenges remain enormous. We don't even know if our species are physiologically compatible for any kind of physical intimacy. The biological risks alone could be significant." "I have been researching this extensively," ZYR8 replied, her tone becoming more clinical, but with an underlying current of excitement. "While our species evolved on different worlds with different biochemistries, we share enough common elements that basic physical contact should be safe. More intimate interactions would require careful preparation and monitoring, but the preliminary analysis suggests compatibility is possible." Marcus felt heat rising to his cheeks as he processed the implications. She had been thinking about this in concrete, practical terms. This wasn't just an abstract academic proposal. She had been genuinely considering the mechanics of intimate contact between their species. "The Ethical Review Board would never approve this," he said, grasping for any remaining rational objection. "The Ethical Review Board would not need to know the personal motivation behind the research," she replied smoothly. "The scientific merit of studying interspecies emotional bonding is undeniable. The fact that the researchers involved might develop genuine feelings for each other could be presented as an unexpected but valuable development in the research." Marcus walked back to his desk and sank into his chair. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. On one hand, everything about this violated every protocol he had ever learned about maintaining professional boundaries and avoiding personal risk in research. On the other hand, the scientific potential was extraordinary, and if he was being honest with himself, the personal appeal was equally compelling. "If I were to agree to this," he said carefully, "what would the actual structure look like? How would we maintain any semblance of scientific objectivity while deliberately exploring intimate connection?" ZYR8's bioluminescent patches brightened noticeably. "I have developed a comprehensive research protocol. We would begin with controlled social interactions designed to test emotional compatibility. Regular documentation of physiological and psychological responses. Gradual progression through increasing levels of intimacy with constant monitoring and ethical safeguards. Everything would be recorded and analyzed according to rigorous scientific standards. And if at any point either of us becomes uncomfortable or wants to withdraw, immediate cessation with full psychological support and counseling. No questions asked, no pressure to continue. The research would be valuable regardless of how far the experiment progressed." Marcus stared at her image, this alien being who had somehow become central to his professional and now potentially personal life. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings about the countless ways this could go wrong. But Another part, a part he usually kept buried beneath layers of scientific caution and professional reserve, whispered about the extraordinary possibilities if it went right. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "Of course," IR8 replied, but he could see the disappointment in the dimming of her bioluminescent patterns. "Take all the time you need. But, Marcus, please remember that some opportunities, once passed, do not come again. The universe rarely offers us the chance to explore truly uncharted territory, both scientifically and personally." After the communication ended, Marcus sat alone in his office for a long time, staring at the blank screen. Outside, the normal routine of the research institute continued, oblivious to the decision that could change everything he thought he knew about human-alien relations. He had 48 hours to give ZYR8 his answer. 48 hours to decide whether to take the biggest risk of his career and possibly his life. The question that kept echoing in his mind wasn't whether the research was valuable or whether the risks were manageable. The question was whether he was brave enough to find out if love could truly transcend the boundaries between worlds. The 48 hours Marcus had given himself to decide felt both infinite and impossibly brief. He found himself unable to focus on his regular research, instead wandering the halls of the Institute and observing human Kivari interactions with new eyes. Every casual conversation between species, every moment of shared laughter or professional collaboration seemed to carry hidden meaning now. On the second evening, he found himself in the Institute's observation lounge, a dimly lit space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the research gardens. It was here that staff often came to decompress after long days of groundbreaking, but mentally exhausting work. Tonight, he wasn't alone. Dr. Sarah Kim, his closest colleague and friend, sat in one of the comfortable chairs, nursing a cup of tea and reading through research notes on her tablet. She looked up as he approached, immediately noting his distracted demeanor. "You look like someone who's been asked to solve the mysteries of the universe before breakfast," she observed with a wry smile. "Rough project." Marcus settled into the chair opposite her, grateful for the familiar comfort of friendship. Sarah had been his confidant through countless professional and personal challenges over the years. If anyone could help him think through this impossible situation, it would be her. "Something like that," he said carefully. "Sarah, can I ask you a hypothetical question?" "When has one of your hypothetical questions ever actually been hypothetical?" she replied, setting down her tablet. "But go ahead. If you were offered the opportunity to participate in groundbreaking research that could revolutionize interspecies cooperation, but it required taking significant personal and professional risks, how would you approach the decision?" Sarah studied his face intently. After 15 years of friendship, she had developed an uncanny ability to read his moods and motivations. "Marcus, what's really going on? You've been walking around like someone who's carrying the weight of the world for 2 days now." He hesitated, weighing how much he could share without violating Zuarath's confidence or revealing the personal nature of the proposal. "I've been approached about a research opportunity that would involve studying emotional bonding between humans and Kethvari. The methodologies would be unconventional, and the personal involvement of the researchers would be significant." "How significant?" Sarah's voice carried a note of concern. "Significant enough that the line between researcher and subject would become very blurred." Sarah leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. "Marcus, are you talking about some kind of participant observation study involving yourself?" "Something like that." She was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Sarah had always been one of the most ethically minded researchers at the Institute, and Marcus knew she would consider all angles before offering advice. The scientific potential would have to be extraordinary to justify that level of personal risk, she said finally, and the ethical oversight would need to be ironclad. "But, Marcus, if this is about what I think it's about, you need to consider the emotional implications very carefully." "What do you think it's about?" "I think Dr. Zohar has proposed studying romantic or intimate connection between your species, and I think she's asked you to be her human partner in this research." The accuracy of her deduction shouldn't have surprised him, but it did. Marcus felt his cheeks reddening. What makes you say that? Because I've watched the way you two interact for the past year, and anyone with eyes can see that your professional collaboration has developed into something more personal. The way she looks at you, the way you light up when she enters a room, the fact that your meetings consistently run hours longer than scheduled. It's not exactly subtle. Marcus stared out the window, watching the bioluminescent garden displays that the Kethvari had installed as a gift to the Institute. The patterns were hypnotically beautiful, alien in their aesthetics, but somehow deeply appealing to human sensibilities. Even if that were true, he said slowly, the risks would be enormous. We're talking about uncharted territory in every possible sense. Biological, psychological, social, professional. Any one of these areas could present insurmountable problems. Or, Sarah said gently, any one of them could lead to discoveries that change everything we understand about consciousness, connection, and the possibilities for intelligent species to truly understand each other. You think I should do it? I think you're already halfway in love with her, and she's clearly halfway in love with you. So the question isn't whether you should explore that connection. The question is whether you're going to approach it with the scientific rigor and ethical oversight that might make it valuable for everyone, or whether you're going to keep pretending it doesn't exist until it either explodes or withers away. The bluntness of her assessment hit Marcus like a physical blow, partly because it forced him to confront feelings he had been carefully avoiding acknowledging. Sarah, I can't be in love with an alien. The very concept is what? Impossible? Unnatural? Sarah's voice carried a note of challenge. Marcus, we've been working alongside their species for 7 years now. We've established that they're not just intelligent, but emotionally complex, capable of forming deep bonds, and compatible with humans on every psychological level we've been able to test. Why is romantic compatibility so much harder to accept than intellectual compatibility? Because romantic love involves physical intimacy, emotional vulnerability, and biological impulses that evolved for intraspecies bonding. Marcus replied, falling back on the clinical explanations he had been using to rationalize his doubts. And yet human beings routinely form romantic bonds across racial, cultural, and even significant age differences. We adapt. We find ways to bridge gaps that our evolutionary programming never anticipated. Sarah paused, studying his face. Marcus, have you ever been this conflicted about a decision before? No. Then, maybe that's telling you something important. That night, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction he had ever had with ZYR-8th, and tried to identify the moment when professional respect had transformed into something more personal. The transition had been so gradual that he couldn't pinpoint it, like watching the seasons change. He remembered the first time she had made him laugh, a carefully constructed joke about the difficulties of translating human idioms into Kethvari conceptual frameworks. He recalled the day she had shown genuine concern when he mentioned feeling homesick for Earth, and how she had somehow arranged for the Institute's cafeteria to serve his favorite childhood comfort food the following week. There was the afternoon when they had worked late on a particularly challenging translation project, and he had found himself explaining human concepts of beauty and art, only to realize that she was studying his face as intently as his words. More recently, there had been moments when their professional interactions had taken on an almost intimate quality. Extended eye contact that lasted just a few seconds too long. The way her bioluminescent patterns seemed to respond to his moods. The increasing frequency with which their hands would brush while reaching for the same research materials, and the strange electricity he felt during those brief contacts. If he was being completely honest with himself, the feelings had been building for months. The proposal from ZYR-8th hadn't created anything new. It had simply offered a framework for exploring something that already existed. At 3 a.m, Marcus made his decision. He activated his secure communication system and composed a message to ZYR-8th. Dr. ZYR-8th, I have given your proposal careful consideration. While I acknowledge the significant risks and challenges involved, I believe the potential scientific value justifies proceeding with caution. I am willing to participate in your research study, provided we establish clear protocols for maintaining both scientific rigor and ethical boundaries. Please prepare a detailed research proposal for review by the appropriate oversight committees. We should meet tomorrow to discuss the practical implementation. Respectfully, Dr. Marcus Chun. He stared at the message for 10 minutes before sending it, his finger hovering over the transmission key as he contemplated the magnitude of what he was agreeing to. When he finally pressed send, he felt simultaneously terrified and more alive than he had in years. The response came within minutes, despite the late hour. Marcus, I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your willingness to embark on this journey with me. I have spent the past several cycles preparing comprehensive protocols and safeguards. Shall we meet in conference room 7 tomorrow at 1400 hours? I believe it would be wise to begin with a thorough discussion of boundaries and expectations before proceeding. With respect and anticipation, ZYR8th. The next day, Marcus arrived at conference room 7 15 minutes early, carrying a tablet full of notes and a stomach full of nervous energy. When Zareth entered, he noticed immediately that her usual professional demeanor seemed different somehow, more personal, more vulnerable. Her bioluminescent patches pulsed in patterns he had never seen before, creating an almost musical rhythm of light across her neck and arms. Thank you for coming, she said, settling into a chair across from him. Before we begin discussing protocols, I want to address the personal dimension of what we are undertaking. Marcus nodded, grateful that she was willing to tackle the emotional complexity head-on. I need you to understand that while this research has legitimate scientific merit, my motivations are not purely academic, she continued. Over the past months of our collaboration, I have developed what I can only describe as affection for you that extends beyond professional respect. This experiment offers us an opportunity to explore whether such feelings can develop into something deeper and more meaningful. I appreciate your honesty, Marcus replied, and I should be equally direct. I've been trying to deny it for weeks, but I've developed feelings for you as well. The thought of exploring what that might mean is both exciting and terrifying. ZYR8's bioluminescent patterns brightened considerably. Then, we are beginning from a foundation of mutual attraction and honest acknowledgement of our motivations. This is more than I had dared hope for. So, where do we start? Marcus asked. With establishing clear phases of exploration and explicit consent protocols for each stage, ZYR8 replied, activating a holographic display that showed a detailed research timeline. I propose we begin with social bonding activities designed to test emotional compatibility. Simple shared experiences, meals, entertainment, conversation in non-professional settings. We document our responses and evaluate compatibility before proceeding. Marcus studied the timeline, and if the initial phase goes well, phase 2 would involve limited physical contact. Holding hands, brief embraces, exploring the tactile compatibility between our species. This would be accompanied by comprehensive medical monitoring to ensure safety. And phase 3, ZYR8's luminescent patterns took on a subtle pink hue that Marcus had never seen before. Phase 3 would involve more intimate physical contact, up to and including what humans would consider sexual intimacy. But we would only proceed to this stage if the previous phases demonstrated clear psychological and physiological compatibility. The clinical way she described it somehow made the concept both more manageable and more real. This wasn't just about abstract romantic feelings. They were planning to systematically explore every aspect of intimate connection between their species. What about the practical challenges? Marcus asked. Our physiologies are significantly different. How do we ensure safety during intimate contact? I have been consulting with xenobiological specialists about compatibility factors, ZYR8 replied, her tone becoming more technical. While our species differ in many ways, we share enough basic biochemistry that intimate contact should be safe with proper preparation. The Kethvari reproductive system is actually remarkably adaptable, and human physiology appears to be compatible with our bonding processes. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as the reality of what they were discussing fully sank in. ZYR8, are you saying that intimate physical relationships between our species are not just possible, but potentially fulfilling for both partners? The preliminary research suggests this is likely, yes. But, Marcus, the physical dimension is only one aspect of what we would be exploring. The emotional and psychological compatibility may prove to be even more significant. They spent the next 3 hours establishing detailed protocols, consent procedures, and safety measures. By the end of the meeting, they had created a comprehensive framework that could pass ethical review while allowing them to explore the full spectrum of intimate connection between their species. As they prepared to leave, ZYR8 touched his arm gently with one of her 4 hands. The contact sent an unexpected thrill through Marcus, confirming that whatever was developing between them was already affecting him on a physical level. Marcus, she said softly, I want you to know that regardless of what we discover through this research, I am grateful to have the opportunity to explore these feelings with you. Win or lose, this is the most meaningful scientific endeavor I have ever undertaken. For me too, he replied, covering her hand with his own. The warmth and texture of her skin was alien, but not unpleasant, different enough to be exotic, similar enough to feel natural. As they stood there, hands touching, Marcus realized they had already begun the experiment. Every interaction from this point forward will be both personal and scientific, every moment of connection documented and analyzed. It was an unprecedented way to approach romance, but then, again, they were attempting something unprecedented. Tomorrow, they would submit their research proposal to the Ethical Review Board. If approved, they would begin the systematic exploration of whether love could truly transcend the boundaries between worlds. Marcus had never been more nervous or more excited about a research project in his life. The Ethical Review Board meeting was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in his career. 7 senior researchers sat around a polished conference table, their faces ranging from skeptical to intrigued as he and ZYR8 presented their research proposal. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the board's chairwoman, had been asking increasingly pointed questions for the past hour. Dr. Chun, she said, leaning forward with her hands clasped, help me understand how you plan to maintain scientific objectivity when you and Dr. Var8 are both the researchers and the subjects of this study. Marcus had prepared for this question, but answering it still felt like walking across a minefield. Dr. Warren, participant observation has a long and respected history in anthropological research. While the personal involvement presents challenges, we believe the insights that can only be gained through direct experience justify the methodological complications. We've established protocols for external monitoring and objective data collection that should help maintain scientific rigor. But Dr. Chun interrupted Dr. James Harrison, the Institute's head of xenobiological safety. This goes far beyond typical participant observation. You're proposing to systematically explore intimate physical contact between species that have never attempted such interactions. The biological risks alone should be prohibitive. ZYR8 activated a holographic display showing comprehensive medical data. Dr. Harrison, I have conducted extensive analysis of human Kethvari physiological compatibility. While our species evolved independently, we share surprising biochemical similarities. The risk of adverse reactions is minimal, and we will be conducting continuous medical monitoring throughout all phases of the research. What about the psychological risks? Asked Dr. Susan Martinez, the board psychology specialist. You're deliberately attempting to form intimate emotional bonds that may have no sustainable future. The potential for psychological trauma is significant for both of you. That's a valid concern, Marcus acknowledged. But consider that humans regularly form intimate relationships with other humans despite knowing that many of these relationships will end. The potential for emotional pain is inherent in any intimate connection, but that doesn't invalidate the value of the experience or the knowledge gained from it. Dr. Warren consulted her notes. Dr. ZYR8, This research proposal represents a significant departure from your previous work in linguistic anthropology. What led you to become interested in intimate interspecies bonding? ZYR Atha's bioluminescent patterns pulsed slowly as she considered her response. Dr. Warren, my work in linguistic anthropology revealed that language is intimately connected to emotional expression and social bonding. As I studied human emotional vocabulary and concepts, I became curious about whether the feelings these words describe could be experienced across species boundaries. My interactions with Dr. Chun provided an opportunity to explore this question from a personal as well as academic perspective. Which brings us to perhaps the most important question, Dr. Warren continued. Dr. Chun, Dr. Garath, are you asking this board to approve a research study, or are you asking us to legitimize a personal relationship that has already begun developing? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt heat rising to his cheeks as he realized the board had seen through their careful academic framing to the personal motivations underneath. Both, he said finally, deciding that honesty was the only viable approach. Dr. Zahar Ath and I have developed feelings for each other that extend beyond professional collaboration. This research proposal offers a framework for exploring those feelings in a way that could generate valuable scientific knowledge about interspecies bonding. We're not trying to hide our personal motivations behind academic legitimacy. We're trying to approach our personal situation with scientific rigor that could benefit the broader research community. Dr. Warren exchanged glances with the other board members. I appreciate your honesty, Dr. Chun. It makes our evaluation significantly easier. She paused, reviewing her notes. The scientific merit of studying interspecies emotional bonding is undeniable. The methodological challenges are significant, but not insurmountable. The ethical concerns are serious, but manageable with proper oversight. What are you saying? ZYR8 asked, her voice carefully controlled. I'm saying that this board is prepared to approve your research proposal, with conditions, Dr. Warren replied. First, you will submit to weekly psychological evaluations throughout the study period. Second, all intimate interactions will be preceded by explicit medical clearance. Third, you will maintain detailed documentation that can be reviewed by external researchers. Fourth, either participant may withdraw from the study at any time without explanation or penalty. And fifth, you will present your findings to the broader research community regardless of the personal outcome of your relationship. Marcus felt a surge of relief and excitement so strong it was almost overwhelming. We accept all conditions. Then, congratulations, Dr. Warren said with a slight smile. You are now conducting the first approved study of romantic love between sapient species. Try not to break any hearts or international treaties in the process. 3 days later, Marcus found himself standing outside the Aretha's quarters in the Institute's residential complex, holding a bottle of wine and wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. They had agreed to begin their research with a simple dinner, their first deliberately social interaction outside of professional settings. When the door opened, Marcus was struck by how different ZYR8 looked in a non-professional context. She wore a flowing garment that seemed to be made of the same bioluminescent material as her skin, creating patterns of soft light that shifted with her movements. Her usual formal bearing had been replaced by something that seemed almost nervous. Marcus, she said, stepping aside to allow him entry. I'm grateful you could come. I hope you will find the environment comfortable. Her quarters were larger than his own, decorated with a fascinating blend of Kethvari artifacts and human furniture. Soft music played from hidden speakers, something that sounded like a fusion of Earth classical and Kethvari tonal compositions. The lighting was warm and subdued, creating an atmosphere that felt intimate without being overwhelming. This is beautiful, Marcus said, looking around with genuine appreciation. Did you decorate it yourself? I wanted to create a space that would feel welcoming to both our species, she replied, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with what he was beginning to recognize as pleasure at his approval. I have been studying human concepts of domestic comfort and aesthetic appeal. They settled at a small table, where she had prepared what appeared to be a carefully researched fusion cuisine, dishes that incorporated flavors and textures familiar to both species. As they ate, their conversation gradually shifted from the stilted formality of their early professional interactions to something more natural and personal. "Tell me about your childhood," ZYR8 said as they finished the main course. "I have read academic descriptions of human development, but I am curious about your specific experience." Marcus found himself sharing stories he rarely told anyone. Memories of growing up in rural Oregon, his early fascination with the stars, the loneliness he had felt as a child who was more interested in books than sports. ZYR8 listened with the kind of focused attention that made him feel like every word was important. "I have observed that humans often speak of childhood as either idyllic or traumatic," she said when he finished. "Your descriptions suggest something more complex." "Most human experiences are more complex than we admit," Marcus replied. "We like simple narratives, but real life is usually messier and more contradictory." "This is also true for HFY," she said, her tone becoming more personal. "My own development cycle was marked by what you might call loneliness. I was always more curious about other species than my peers thought appropriate. While they focused on perfecting traditional knowledge, I wanted to understand alien ways of thinking and feeling." "Is that why you chose to study human language and behavior?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps I was unconsciously seeking connection with minds that think differently than my own." Her luminescent patterns took on a soft golden hue. "I find human emotional complexity fascinating. The way you can hold contradictory feelings simultaneously, the intensity of your attachments, the willingness to take emotional risks despite the potential for pain." After dinner, they moved to her living area, settling onto a soft couch that had been designed to accommodate both human and HFY physiology. The conversation continued, flowing naturally between personal history, philosophical observations, and moments of comfortable silence. "Marcus," ZYR8 said during one of these quiet interludes, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Have you ever experienced what humans call romantic love before?" The question caught him off guard, though he supposed it was inevitable given the nature of their research. "Yes, several times, though never quite like this." "What makes this different?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think it's the sense of discovery. With human partners, there were always familiar patterns and assumptions. With you, everything is new. I can't predict how you'll react to things or what you'll find meaningful. It keeps me constantly engaged and curious." "I find myself experiencing something similar," she said, shifting slightly closer to him on the couch. "Human emotional expressions are often subtle but profound. The way your eyes change when you're happy, the unconscious gestures you make when you're thinking deeply, the way your voice carries different meanings depending on context. I feel like I am learning a new language of intimacy." As she spoke, Marcus became acutely aware of their physical proximity. ZYR8 was close enough that he could see the intricate patterns of her bioluminescence, could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. When she reached out to touch his hand, the contact sent electricity through his entire nervous system. "Is this acceptable?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," he replied, turning his hand palm up so their fingers could intertwine. Her touch was warm and soft, with a texture that was unfamiliar but pleasant. More importantly, the gesture felt natural despite the anatomical differences between their species. They sat that way for several minutes, hands joined, both of them fascinated by the simple intimacy of the contact. Marcus found himself studying the play of light across Aretha's skin, the way her bioluminescent patterns seemed to respond to her emotional state. "Your light patterns," he said softly, "they're beautiful. Do you control them consciously? Some patterns are voluntary. Others are automatic emotional responses," she explained. "Right now, they are reflecting contentment and anticipation. Being close to you like this creates sensations that I lack adequate vocabulary to describe." "I think I understand," Marcus said. "I'm feeling things I don't have words for either." As the evening progressed, they gradually moved closer together, their conversation becoming more intimate and personal. Marcus found himself sharing fears and dreams he had never voiced to anyone, while Zilharath revealed aspects of Kethvari emotional life that she had never discussed with humans before. When she eventually leaned against his shoulder, her head resting against his neck, Marcus felt a sense of rightness that was both surprising and profound. Despite the alien nature of her physiology, despite the unprecedented circumstances of their relationship, holding her felt natural. "Marcus," she said softly, her breath warm against his skin. "I want you to know that regardless of what our research discovers, tonight has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my existence." "For me too," he replied, gently stroking her luminescent skin and marveling at how responsive it was to his touch. "I never imagined that connection could transcend species barriers like this." When he eventually left her quarters several hours later, Marcus felt as though something fundamental had changed in his understanding of what was possible between different forms of intelligent life. The evening had been a success by any measure. They had established emotional compatibility, demonstrated that physical contact was not only safe but pleasurable for both of them, and generated valuable data about interspecies bonding. But more than that, he was beginning to fall genuinely in love with an alien being, and she seemed to be experiencing something similar. What had begun as a scientific experiment was becoming a personal journey that could redefine everything he thought he knew about love, connection, and the possibilities for understanding between different forms of consciousness. As he walked back to his own quarters, Marcus realized that tomorrow they would move to phase 2 of their research, more extensive physical contact and intimacy. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, but after tonight's success, he was beginning to believe that love might truly be universal enough to bridge any gap between worlds.